Hey there, seventh grade. We're looking at the final programming challenge of the quarter here. This is a fully functioning SumoBot program. That's what we're looking to do. So you want to write a program that will make it so that your SumoBot can run fully autonomously, meaning you put the SumoBot down, you push the play button, and the program does everything else. The robot does everything else. That's what we're looking for. So that's a pretty big program, but it's still something that's well within our grasp. Definitely things we can think about and process through without too much difficulty, I think. Um, First thing I want to point out is this circle. And you're like, who cares? It's a white circle with a black edge. Yes, that's true. However, this is what your sumo arena looks like, right? So your sumo arena will be a white circle with a black ring around the outside, and that's important to know when we're thinking about how we're setting up our sensor. So that information is important for you to have. Next thing we're going to look at is what are expectations and requirements, right? So this is what we're looking at. The first thing I want to point out here on this page is there's a link here to a YouTube video, and this YouTube video is a YouTube video that I used to get some of the code or get some ideas for the code that I was going to write for this SumoBot program. So good resource if you want to watch this video instead of mine. More than supportive of you doing that. It's definitely good information, good thoughts to think through as you're working on this. Again, we're going to look to create a fully operational SumoBot. 3 expectations or requirements. Number 1, robot should use the color sensor to avoid driving out of the arena. So that's the first thing, and that's not too bad. We can do that without too much difficulty. Number 2, robot should use the infrared sensor. In the video, the guy uses the ultrasonic sensor. We don't have that sensor on our robots. So if you're watching this video, this YouTube video, replace ultrasonic with infrared, and you should be able to do the same thing. You're going to use that sensor, the infrared sensor, to find the other robot. And then number 3, robot should use the touch sensor to run the lift arm. So if it runs into something, it should use the touch sensor to run that lift arm. That's what we're looking to do. So again, YouTube video, if you want it, we're going to run a program. Listen, these 3 characteristics, I would tell you they're in hierarchical order, meaning the most important thing is to make sure that color sensor keeps you in the arena. That's number 1. And then we're going to run those other things as secondary events or secondary things to think about in our program. Let's move on. So here is our programming window. And in this programming window, we're going to look at, okay, so how are we going to write this program? I've got some examples from previous semesters or previous quarters classes, and I'm going to show you 3 of them, right? So here's a student set up the color sensor. Now this is on black or red, which we don't need, but it's looking for one of those colors. When it sees those colors, it's going to back up, and then because these 2 are opposite, it's going to turn. If it's not on black or red, though, it's looking at the infrared sensor to see if something is less than 40 away. If it is, it's going to drive at that. If it's not, it's going to turn slowly. Makes sense. Then it's going to check the touch sensor. If it's touching something, it's going to lift, right? So that's what it's set up as, basically. And some of these sensors are set up wrong. This touch sensor, for instance, is set up wrong. I think this infrared sensor might actually also be set up wrong. And even the color sensor, we could say, is set up wrong-ish because of the black and red. So the program, though, the structure of the program is probably what we're looking for, and we'll talk more about that. This is a different program, different student wrote, and this one is just a loop, and then they set up their 3 switches one after another, and it should work. It's definitely a different approach, but it's not any more wrong or right than other programs, as long as it's doing the thing that we needed to do. And again, testing this in the Sumo setup would help us know whether or not this was going to do the job. And then there's a 3rd version here that's set up pretty well, but again, differently. Instead of the color sensor, this student used the reflected light intensity sensor, which is fine. If they're seeing black, which is what this is set up as, then we're going to turn it off and then back up. They've got 2 motors running at negative rotation, so negative speed, excuse me, for 1 rotation. Then they're going to turn 90 degrees, and then we're going to use if that's not the case, excuse me, if we're not seeing black, then we're going to use the infrared sensor and drive forward if we see something, or turn slowly if we don't, and then touch sensor we're going to lift if we find if we bump into something. So Again, these sensors are set up a little bit better than some of the other ones, but still on target and along the lines of what we're looking for. So what I'm going to write, and again, I'll tell you that you could write programs like any of those three programs and probably be okay. But what we're going to write is a program that's going to do what we want it to as effectively as possible. So we're going to start with a loop, and that seems to make sense, or should seem to make sense to you, because we want to do something over and over again. We've got three sensors we got to check, three, not four, and we need to check those sensors over and over and over and over again. So a loop definitely is what we need. Next, what I'm going to tell you to do is bring in a switch, and I'll make my switch look like yours does. So you only see one of the bands of the switch at a time, and then we'll drop that right there in that forever loop. Now, the first sensor we need to set up isn't the touch sensor. The first thing we need to set up, the most important sensor for us to keep in mind, is that color sensor, right? Now, you could set it up at reflected light intensity. I would just tell you to set it up as color. That seems like the simplest. And then the color needs to be black because the edge of our arena is black. So we want to look for black. So I'll turn the red off, so it's just looking for black. And if it finds black, so this is the check mark band. If it finds black, what do we want to do? Well, we want to back up, and there's a lot of different ways we can do that, but one of the easiest is to just do a move tank, and I'll make mine look like yours does, and I'll just say -1 rotation, so that's backing up. And then the second thing we want to do is we want to turn, right? And there's a couple different ways you could turn, but maybe the simplest way to turn is just use a move steering. And we'll set this up at 45 degrees of turn. And again, I'll make it look like yours does when you drop it in. You can make this 90 degrees of turn. You could make it 100 degrees of turn. You could make it whatever you want it to be. I'm just going to set up as 45 and see how that works in my program. Now, because this is the check mark band, what I would tell you to do is put that same code up above grayed out. And the reason I'm going to tell you to do that is so that I can see your code in your screenshot. And again, this is the thing that we've talked about before, and isn't a big surprise. Because when I click on this X, you can't see the code we just put in the check mark, right? So this is the code, and now we're going to write the code for if you don't see the black line. If you don't see the black line, we're going to add another switch, right? So I'll bring this switch in, and then I'll set it up so it looks like yours, and then I'll bring this switch right in here into the X line. So this switch, we should be using our infrared sensor, all right? So we're going to set up the infrared sensor to compare proximity. And again, we're looking for something that's less than, and let's say less than 40% or 40, I think centimeters is what the guy in the other video said, but 40% of the viewable distance away. If we see something, we want to drive at it, right? So in the check mark here, we're going to make it just a move tank. And in the video of the other guy's video, he just says, just turn it on, right? Just turn it on and let it run. And that's fine. If you wanted to do that, do that. If you want to just turn it on for a rotation, you can do that. It's not going to make a difference. But on makes sense because we want to drive that other vehicle out of the arena, okay? Then in the X line, what is it we want the robot to do if we don't see another robot? Well, what we want it to do if we don't see another robot is we want it to turn slowly, right? So again, we can turn our move tank, just turn it on. And then I want it to move slowly. So I'm going to turn one of my motors on to 20 and the other one on to -20. So now I've got my two motors moving in opposite directions. So my robot's going to turn. And because I put that power on a low setting, they're going to turn pretty slowly, okay? Which is good because I'm turning slowly and looking for that other robot. Now, this is my infrared sensor set up the way that I need it. The next thing to think about is what's next, and that's the touch sensor, okay? So my touch sensor, again, I'll bring in another switch block, and I'll set that up to look like yours, and I'll bring that right in the same place, right in that same band of the blocks that we were coding before. Now, the nice thing about the touch sensor is we only need something if it does sense the touch, right? And again, as it's set up is the way we want it. The touch sensor on number one, which means that touch sensor is pressed. What do we want to happen? Well, if that touch sensor is pressed, we want to run the medium motor. And I'll bring mine in as like yours would be. And I would tell you 2 rotations of the medium motor. It's going to run that lift as it should. Now, this program as it is right here, should do the thing we want it to, right? If we see the black, we're going to back up and turn, right? If we don't see the black, we're going to check that sensor. If we see something, we're going to drive at it. If we don't see something, we're going to turn slowly, hopefully, until we do see something. And if we run into something, we're going to run our lift arm to try and pick it up and then push it out of the arena. So again, this program, as it is, probably should do exactly what we're looking for it to do in pretty good fashion. Now, again, we'll test it and we'll see, and then from there, we'll know what we've got. So hopefully you've got a nice program written yourself. And again, keep in mind, these are your requirements. So double check your requirements, make sure you're meeting those. And again, excited to see your screenshots and get your code onto this robot so we can see how well your Sumo bot works. Let's get coding.